Modern agriculture did not replace weaker crops. It replaced the ones that did not need it. There was a root once, dark and irregular, pulling itself deep into exhausted soil while grains withered above it. It fed miners and shepherds. It fed children through winters when rivers froze and roads disappeared. It thickened underground without supervision. It asked little. It returned much. It was too patient, too self-contained, too nourishing in a way that could not be simplified into yield charts. And what cannot be simplified cannot be scaled. What cannot be scaled cannot be owned. So it was set aside. Its name faded from ledgers, its seeds from catalogs, its memory from kitchens. The root still exists, but not where it once ruled. This archive is not a place of nostalgia. It is a vault of things that endured without permission. Here, inside ancient food files, we preserve what systems found inconvenient, what progress quietly erased, what soil remembers, even when markets forget. If you choose to remain, consider subscribing not for growth, but for guardianship. These stories are fragile only when untold. Tonight, we open another file. It begins in the Andean highlands, long before borders, long before maps drew clean lines across mountain ranges. At elevations where breath thins and frost visits without warning, communities cultivated a root known in Quechua as ruculcaiwa. In Aymara, it carried other names, spoken softly, attached to origin stories that tied plant to ancestor. The plant we now call mashua, botanically known as Tropalium tuberosum, did not arrive through conquest. It emerged through selection, through patient observation across centuries of terrace farming. Its vines trailed low across stone-lined fields. Its leaves were rounded, green, veined like cupped hands. In late season, small trumpet-shaped flowers flared in shades of amber and deep red, nodding in cold wind. Below the soil, the true architecture formed. Tubers elongated like knotted fingers, skin marked with streaks of purple and gold, flesh dense, scent sharp when cut. The taste, when raw, carried a bitterness that softened with cooking, releasing sweetness beneath. This was not a root that sought approval. It thrived between 3,000 and 4,000 meters above sea level, where rainfall came uncertainly and nights could descend below freezing even in summer months. The Andean agricultural system did not rely on single crops. Potatoes grew nearby, oca, quinoa, but mashua held a particular place. It resisted pests. Its scent repelled certain insects and rodents. Farmers planted it at field edges as a living barrier, protecting more delicate crops. It served not only as food, but as guardian. Oral histories did not describe this as accident. The plant was seen as companion, protective, a presence that guarded both soil and household. The Inca state, centered in Cusco before the arrival of Europeans in the 16th century, cataloged crops meticulously. Chroniclers later recorded storehouses, or culcas, built into mountainsides to preserve tubers against famine and siege. Mashua was among them. It stored well in cold, dry air. It dried into lighter forms that could be rehydrated months later. It endured. Biologically, its resilience was not mystical, it was structural. Mashua produces secondary compounds known as glucosinolates, chemicals also present in cruciferous plants. These compounds contribute to its pungent aroma and natural pest resistance. They discourage nematodes in soil. They deter certain insects without intervention. Its tubers form deep and irregularly, reducing the chance that a single frost event or surface disturbance will destroy the entire harvest. Even when vines are grazed or damaged, the underground reserve persists. It tolerates poor soils, converting marginal land into sustenance. It grows without heavy nutrient inputs. It coexists in polycultures, weaving through companion crops rather than demanding monoculture dominance. In chaotic climates, it performs quietly. For highland societies where landslides, droughts, and sudden cold could undo a season's labor, this mattered. The Spanish arrived in the 1530s. With them came horses, steel, and unfamiliar diseases. Entire communities collapsed under epidemics. Agricultural knowledge fragmented as elders died. Yet certain crops remained because they required little centralized control. Mashua was one of them. In 1570, colonial administrator Francisco de Toledo reorganized Andean settlements into reducciones, forcing indigenous populations into concentrated towns for taxation and conversion. Fields were abandoned, terraces crumbled. Still, in scattered plots beyond official oversight, tubers continued to grow. Records from Jesuit missionaries describe local diets reliant on potatoes and other roots of sharp taste. They did not always distinguish between species, but they noted survival. Centuries later, during regional famines in the 19th century, particularly those linked to drought cycles and political unrest, highland communities again turned to traditional tubers. Grain imports faltered, livestock thinned, roots beneath stone walls endured. Mashua's yields were modest compared to modern potatoes, but they were consistent. Consistency becomes sacred when hunger is near. In 1879, during the War of the Pacific between Chile, Peru, and Bolivia, supply lines fractured across the Andes. Rural households relied on what could not be requisitioned easily by armies. Crops that grew in hidden terraces, in marginal soil, became lifelines. There are no monuments to these tubers, only survival statistics. And yet, by the dawn of the 20th century, Mashua's prominence began to fade. The reasons were not dramatic, they were administrative. Agricultural modernization favored uniformity. Tubers that varied in shape and color complicated packaging and transport. Bitter undertones, once accepted as seasonal markers, were deemed undesirable in urban markets. Yields, when measured against expanding monocultures of improved potato varieties, appeared modest. Mashua did not lend itself to industrial scaling. Its vines tangled, its tubers resisted mechanical harvest. Storage required cool, dry air rather than centralized silos. It was unmanageable, unownable, inconvenient to a system that sought predictability. Land reforms in the 20th century further altered crop priorities. In Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador, state programs encouraged high-yield varieties for commercial export. Potatoes, bred for uniform size and neutral taste, replaced diverse traditional cultivars. Quinoa underwent similar shifts. Mashua, associated with rural subsistence rather than profit, slipped into peripheral status. There were other forces. In some regions, Mashua carried reputational weight as a poor man's food. During periods of hardship, it had been eaten daily. When economic conditions improved, households often distanced themselves from foods tied to memory of scarcity. Survival foods sometimes bear stigma. To eat them in times of abundance feels like regression. So children grew up preferring refined grains, imported rice, standardized potatoes. Markets adjusted accordingly. The plant did not vanish, it retreated. In the late 20th century, agronomists began to re-examine Andean crops under new frameworks of biodiversity and resilience. Institutions such as the International Potato Center in Lima cataloged native tuber varieties, including Mashua, preserving genetic lines that might otherwise disappear. Laboratory analyses revealed high levels of vitamin C, carotenoids, and certain antioxidant compounds. Studies documented its glucosinolate profile and potential antimicrobial properties. Traditional uses as both food and medicinal infusion found biochemical echoes in peer-reviewed journals. There was no sudden renaissance, only confirmation. Ancient selection practices, refined across generations, aligned quietly with modern nutritional metrics. Researchers noted Mashua's resistance to pests without synthetic inputs. Its adaptability to high-altitude stress conditions suggested potential relevance in regions facing climate instability. As glaciers in the Andes receded and rainfall patterns shifted, crops tolerant of fluctuation regained scientific interest. Yet interest does not guarantee restoration. Industrial supply chains remain calibrated to uniformity. Consumer expectations, shaped by decades of standardization, do not shift easily. The plant waits in terraces and smallholder plots. Memory complicates revival. For some elders, Mashua evokes resilience. For others, it evokes hunger. Children who remember eating it daily during economic crises may resist its return to mainstream tables. Trauma embeds itself in taste. This is not irrational, it is human. Food is biography. When a crop becomes synonymous with hardship, its rejection can feel like progress, but erasure carries cost. With each generation that abandons cultivation, localized knowledge fragments. The precise timing of planting relative to lunar cycles, the specific intercropping patterns that minimized pest pressure, the subtle cues in leaf color that signal readiness for harvest. These are not written in manuals. They reside in practice, and practice fades when unused. Now, as global climate models project increased volatility, drought in some regions, excessive rainfall in others, modern agricultural systems reveal fragility. Fields planted in vast monocultures suffer when a single pathogen adapts. Supply chains falter under geopolitical strain. The lesson is not nostalgia, it is redundancy. Mashua was designed for variability. It does not demand perfect conditions. It does not collapse under minor stress. It occupies ecological niches that high-yield varieties neglect. In marginal soils where chemical inputs are scarce, it still forms tubers. In cold nights that damage other crops, it persists. It is not a solution to every crisis. It is an example of preparedness long embedded in tradition. Across the Andes today, small cooperatives have begun reintroducing native tubers into local markets, not as relics, but as continuity. Yet these efforts remain modest. The broader system remains oriented toward export commodities, and still the root grows. There is something unsettling in this endurance. A plant sidelined by policy and preference continues to root itself in forgotten terraces. It does not lobby, it does not advertise. It persists because its design allows persistence. Its survival strategy is not dominance, it is patience. The knowledge surrounding this root was never entirely lost, it was ignored. The vault is not empty, it waits for reconsideration. If you choose to continue walking through this archive to preserve what systems overlook, consider subscribing, not for novelty, for memory. The soil does not forget easily, time does not rush, and beneath fields that appear uniform, other roots are waiting.